Hello, everybody. This is Nathan Hale. I am excited to be visiting with you guys in the library today. I am a cartoonist, so rather than you guys just having to watch my talking face this whole time, I'm going to do some drawing while I talk. So let me switch my camera over to the screen that I like to draw on, and we'll go from there. So you should be seeing some scribbling on the screen right now. Is that coming through? Hopefully it is. So my name is Nathan Hale. I am the author and illustrator of the Hazardous Tales series, a monster series that has just hit this very month 10 books. I cannot believe it. I've only read a handful of series that have 10 books in it. I can't believe I've actually done one. Let's see if I got my boxes right here. It's hard to draw and talk at the same time, especially to draw and count. Oh, I did it, you guys. This is very exciting. The new book that came out this very month is book number 10 in the Hazardous Tales series, and I'm going to talk about that one in a minute. Let me run through really quickly what we're going to do today. First things first, I'm going to give you just a little quick intro and what I'm doing with the launch of this book, how it's working and what I'm talking about. And then, and I'm excited about this, I'm going to tell you guys some specific stuff, some history stuff specific to the Hazardous Tales book that takes place closest to you guys, which is my World War II bombing raid book, which has a big section on Pearl Harbor. Little special extra story about Pearl Harbor. Then I'm going to jump into a quick description of book number 10 and everything that goes on in it. And then after that, I will answer your burning questions about the series, about being a cartoonist, about the things that I've drawn and talked about. So if you have a question as I'm going along, go ahead and put it into the Q&A section as your great librarian showed before. So we wanted to do something special for book 10. When I say we, I mean me and the publisher. The publisher has a group of publicists and they have crazy ideas. And their crazy idea for book number 10 was, this is an exact drawing of my publicist there. This is Mary. Maybe she's watching today. There she is. She's done a great job putting all of this together. They had a crazy idea of doing a book tour of 10 cities in 10 days, I believe we wanted to do. And then the crazy thing about each one of these cities was going to be tied in to the book that took place closest to there. So, for One Dead Spy, the first book in the series, is a Revolutionary War book about Nathan Hale. So we were going to go to Vermont or Connecticut or something. In the Civil War book, we were going to be down in Virginia. And then for the Donner Party book, we'd be up in California doing all of these visits. And of course, Hawaii was chosen for my World War II book, Rate of No Return. Then, of course, you guys know what happened. Coronavirus came and just destroyed all of our plans. So I've still done it, but I've done it on Zoom instead. I'm sure you guys are all excited to be on Zoom. It's the funnest place to be all day. I'm sure you guys know that in school, especially. But let's jump in, and I want to talk to you guys about my Pearl Harbor book. Now, if you have not read Rate of No Return, let me switch up the screen so I can show you it a little closer. Rate of No Return is the light blue book in the series. It's this one right here with the B-25 bomber on the front. And this book starts in your home state. It starts with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And it was fascinating to research. I wish I was more spoiled and got to go to more places to actually do research in person. I did not get to go to Pearl Harbor in person for research on this book. I had to rely on libraries and documentaries and books to do all of my Pearl Harbor research and work. I'll tell you what was a fascinating thing. This is the entire Japanese fleet that came to attack Pearl Harbor. Every one of those carriers and destroyers and everything all grouped up, headed on their way to Pearl Harbor. This book was probably my favorite for drawing machines and things. Plenty of the books, in the Revolutionary War, you get to draw like a flintlock gun or a wagon or something. But in this, I finally got to draw some of my favorite things, which is World War II machines. This book is about the Doolittle raid, which was B-25 bombers. And I knew I'd be having to draw a lot of B-25s. And so I got a little model kit and I built a B-25. This whole year that I was working on this book, I could not stop thinking about B-25s. I visited a B-25. I got to go climb around on the inside of it. The photos of that are in the book. I did models when I was a little kid, and I thought, oh, now I'm an adult. I'm going to be able to really nail this model. But if you look closely at it, oh, I did a terrible job. I'm just as bad as I was when I was 10 years old. If you are interested in history, though, especially during this lockdown coronavirus time, order up a model. Get a model from one of your local toy stores and put it together. You get to learn a lot about history just kind of putting things together. But I had put this book out and was out doing school visits. Now, the dedication of this book was really weird because it's the only time I've ever done a Hazardous Tales book where somebody in the book was still alive. That person was Colonel Richard E. Cole, who was one of these pilots. In fact, he was the co-pilot for Jimmy Doolittle, which the entire raid is named after. He was in plane number 1 on this bombing run. So I dedicated it to him because he was still alive. And that was crazy to me to do a book where the person was still alive. Let me switch back to drawing. So when you are a history cartoonist, like I am, you spend a lot of time visiting schools and trying to get people excited about history. And this is what I do a lot. Not so much this year. I was actually in New Jersey when the first lockdown happened last March, and I had to drop everything, cancel the school visits for the day, and fly back home. But usually, on a regular year, I'm out doing school visits, and I visit tons of schools, and I talk to tons of kids. I was on, I saw the announcement before for the Nene Awards. I was on Texas's awards list one year. That's called the Bluebonnet Books. And one of my books was a Bluebonnet book. I was super excited. And what that means is I end up doing a lot of, well, that's the worst Texas I've ever drawn. I end up doing a lot of school visits in Texas. Now, I was in San Antonio. So I'm better at drawing the Alamo than I am at drawing Texas. I'm just like Alamo here. Because I did an Alamo book and because I have a Bluebonnet book, I end up going to the great state of Texas a lot, which is an interesting place. And I was in San Antonio and I was doing a school visit and I was talking about this new book, Rate of No Return. And while I was doing a school visit, I got a little email on my phone. So, while the second graders or the third graders were leaving and the fifth graders were coming in, I looked on my phone to see what the notification was. And it was an email. And that email said, "Hello, I just saw your book. I am the daughter of Richard E. Cole, and he is so excited that you dedicated the book to him. He is one of the Doolittle Raiders. He is still alive, and we just wanted you to know that we like the book, and if you want one signed, here is our address, and you could mail it to us." And I was really excited because this was like getting an email from like Davy Crockett or George Washington or something. This was one of the true heroes from my books. And the teacher, she was waiting for the kids to come in. Actually, this was the school librarian, sorry. School librarian, I showed it to her and she said, "What's the address?" And I said, "Oh, it's some little town in Texas." And she said, "Some little town in Texas? That's 5 minutes from here." And I said, should I email him back and say that I'm like 5 minutes away? And this librarian was like, "You better do it. You have to do it." And I was really chicken because it was cool to get an email, but meeting one of these heroes in person, I couldn't believe it. So I emailed back and I said, "I would love to get a book signed, and you're not going to believe this, but I'm about 15 minutes from where you are. Can I come and visit Colonel Richard E. Cole, the last living Doolittle Raider?" And she said, "Sure. How about tomorrow?" Now, here's the problem. I didn't have any copies of my book to get signed. I was doing school visits. I don't usually travel with lots of my own books. So I ran to Barnes and Nobles trying to find a copy. I was able to find one copy of my book, but then I was in trouble because I didn't have an extra copy for him. So I went to another store where I found another copy. Whew. And then I thought, well, I got to show up with something cool besides just a book. So I was traveling, but I always travel with my little watercolor kit. So I made a little watercolor of a B-25. I'd drawn them so many times, I knew exactly how to draw it. And I signed my name and I drew a picture of the hangman and said, thanks for being an inspiration. And I went to this little town and I got to meet him. And I've got photos. So right here is the little watercolor that I made. This was in December of 2018. Here's the bombing uniform that he would have worn in a little B-25, just a little pencil drawing, then watercolored in. I went and ran to the store and got a little frame to put it in. And he showed me his patch. That is the Doolittle Raiders official patch. And this right here is Richard E. Cole, the last living Doolittle Raider. I got to meet him. It was wild. He pointed to my book and he said, I liked this book because it wasn't just about Jimmy Doolittle, it was about everybody. And I said, did I get anything wrong? Here he is holding the artwork right there. I said, did I get anything wrong? And he said, yes, you did. And I said, what was it? And he said, all right, see the page that I'm on, the page where we are flying over Tokyo and the anti-aircraft guns are going off. Well, on the page that you've drawn, there's a bunch of flak exploding all over in the air. Now, I only saw 3 puffs of anti-aircraft fire. So I made a little note in my copy that I kept. I said, Richard E. Cole said there were only 3 puffs. He said, we were the first plane through. The planes behind me would have seen a lot more flak bursts blowing up. And I got the chills because this crazy picture that I had drawn in one of these books was something that he was there for. He got to see it. Anyway, I wanted to share that story with you guys because this is the World War II, the Pearl Harbor book. Sadly, he passed away the next year. So he was the final Doolittle Raider. The cool thing is the book was already out at this point. I got to draw him. The Doolittle Raiders, if you haven't read this book, have a tradition where they would meet every year and they had these little silver cups and they would all do a toast with the silver cups. And then when one of them died that year, they'd turn the cups upside down. And last year in 2019, the last cup was turned over for Richard E. Cole. If you want to see this actual toast, the final toast of the Doolittle Raiders, it's on YouTube. Just type in final toast of the Doolittle Raiders. It's a pretty fascinating thing to see. Anyway, hope you guys like that story. Let me talk about the new one though. This is, let me go back to my drawing screen. Always funner to see the drawing instead of the talking. All right, so yeah, check that book out if you haven't yet. See if you can find anything's wrong in it like Colonel Richard E. Cole did. So here we go. Book number 10, what's this one about? This one might be the craziest one of all. I thought it would be a very simple subject matter. Some of these books are more complicated than others. If you've read Big Bad Ironclad, you know that's just about one guy doing pranks during the Civil War. If you've read Treaties, Trenches, Mud, and Blood, you know that is about the entire Western Front of World War I. There are different levels of complexity, and this one has got to be among the most complicated of all of them. I started with a simple concept, though, something a lot of us learned about in school, the Louisiana Purchase, which is the big chunk in the middle of the country right there. There it is, LP. The Louisiana Territory is what this story was about, but I didn't want to cover afterwards, you know, when Lewis and Clark go in and explore it or things like that. No. I wanted to explore how this happened, why the United States doubled in size, who owned it before. Everything about the Louisiana Purchase is what I set off on. Now, it got so crazy and so complicated, I had to come up with a whole new style for this book. The style of this book is it's kind of like a game show with the narrators on the gallows. You know them, the hangman and Nathan Hale and the British provost and Billy. They're here again like they always are, but this time there's so much to talk about that Nathan Hale makes a magical, we call it the Louisiana Purchase Wheel of Destiny. He makes that appear on the gallows. It's like a big game show. And the hangman and everybody take turns spinning the wheel to see what will pop up on the wheel that has to do with the Louisiana Purchase. And every time something pops up, we do a chapter on it. So this is almost like a collection of short stories that are all intertwined. The first thing, I think most people know this historical fact, the president who bought the Louisiana Purchase. He was president number 3. We had already had George Washington. We had already had John Adams. It was time for the number 3 guy. Everybody knows this president. It's Thomas Jefferson. There he is. Beautiful. All right. Sorry. Might be 3 o'clock for you guys, but where I'm at, it is 6:15 and it is cold and snowing outside. I'm a little, there we haven't warmed up. There we go. All right. There's our Thomas Jefferson. We know that Thomas Jefferson was the guy who made this deal. That's about all I heard about the Louisiana Purchase. I didn't know who the first European explorers were to go there, when they found it. There's a chapter on those first explorers. This guy's one of the main guys is a Frenchman named La Salle. He's the guy that claimed it for King Louis of France. That's why it's called Louisiana, because it's named after King Louis. There's a chapter on him. Of course, there's chapters on Thomas Jefferson. Now, here's the crazy thing. Thomas Jefferson had zero interest in buying all of the Louisiana territory. He didn't even think anybody would ever sell that. All he wanted to do was have a little piece of the city of New Orleans. New Orleans was all he cared about, so he wanted to buy a piece of this city, which belonged to France. So he sent some guys to go talk to the leader of France. Now, the leader of France at that time, if you are a history buff, you've got to love this guy. He had a big, gigantic hat. You guys know this guy. It's Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte. This guy was running France at that time. In fact, he was running practically all of Europe because he was one of the greatest military masterminds of all time. He was taking over the world at this point. Thomas Jefferson wanted to make a deal with this guy, Napoleon Bonaparte, see if he would sell it. So he sent a couple of guys over to talk to Napoleon Bonaparte. Who were the guys who had this crazy job? Well, one of them was James Monroe. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because James Monroe became president number 5. His buddy that went over with him was a guy named Livingston. Livingston and Monroe get a chapter. Livingston cracks me up. He's maybe the goofiest drawn person in all of Hazardous Tales. He's very goofy looking. His face looks like a thumb. He's got one of these hearing horns that he puts in his ear so he can hear better because he had hearing problems. James Monroe. These 2 guys go over. Now, that would be a boring story. 2 guys making a deal with another guy. Nah, it's got to be more exciting. They spin the wheel and crazier things pop up. The craziest person I got to learn about was another Bonaparte, not Napoleon, but his crazy little sister, Pauline Bonaparte. Pauline never came to the United States, but she did come to the New World. And the place that she came to is where a lot of this story takes place. It's a little island in the Caribbean called Saint-Domingue. And Saint-Domingue was a French colony. Pauline went there with her husband as part of this story. Her chapters are some of the strangest and scariest of the book because of what happens on this French colony. The little island of Saint-Domingue was a very wealthy island. It grew something you guys know all about in Hawaii, sugarcane. Sugarcane Island right here. It was also, another thing you guys know about in Hawaii, coffee. It was a sugar and coffee island, just like you guys. This little island, though, in the early 1800s produced half of the world's supply of sugar and coffee, but it was run by the French, and it was run with one of the worst systems possible. The worst thing a human can do to another human being short of murder, it was run on slavery. Slaves were brought to this island, human slaves, trafficked and brought from Africa to this island of Saint-Domingue to get sugar and coffee for the French. This island made so much money. It made more money than all 13 colonies ever dreamed of making for the UK. This island made a fortune. But the slaves of this island fought back. These enslaved people did not want to work for the French, and they rose up and they fought. Pauline was there. She witnessed this in person. One of the most fascinating people from this revolution is on the cover of the book. His name is Toussaint Louverture. He is a general. His armies fought Napoleon's armies in crazy, exciting battles. He was a leader of this revolution, and many other leaders of this revolution are also in this book, leading revolts, spying, causing all kinds of exciting battles and sequences that happen. If you've never heard of this island of Saint-Domingue, well, that's because that's not the name it's known for anymore. The name that this island took after these slaves fought Napoleon was a new name. They renamed the part of the island that they lived on Haiti. It was the Haitian Revolution. Now, I had never heard about this in school, but the people of Haiti and their revolution against the French really handed Thomas Jefferson the entire Louisiana Purchase. Spoiler alert, but it's a fascinating story and not one I ever heard about in school. What happened on Saint Domingue, the nation of Haiti, is actually the greatest uprising of enslaved people in human history. It was the second big successful revolution in the New World. The first one, 1776, United States versus Great Britain in the Revolutionary War. The second one, the Haitian Revolution, 1803, Haiti versus France. You'll have to read the book to get all the crazy details. Last of all, this book was a hard book to draw and write, because while I was drawing it, we were in the middle of the worst pandemic the United States has ever seen. And guess what? This book is also about a pandemic. This is a book about yellow fever. Yellow fever came to this island, it came to the United States, and it was brought here. It wasn't a disease that just kind of formed here. Oh no, it came in mosquitoes. And these particular mosquitoes, the ones that carried yellow fever, well, guess how they got to this island of Saint Domingue? They came on slave ships. Not an expected consequence that these European slavers thought about. When they came on these ships, they brought barrels of drinking water. Inside the barrels of drinking water, mosquitoes. Inside the mosquitoes, yellow fever. These mosquitoes were deadly. If you got bit by one of these yellow fever mosquitoes, you would very likely die. I was drawing the artwork in this book while the pandemic was going. And if you think we have it bad right now, and trust me, we do. This is as bad as it gets. This is horrible. But I would much rather be alive now than in a yellow fever epidemic, because the yellow fever, ooh, it's awful. You get very, very sick and feverish, and right before you die, the last thing that happens is blood comes out of your eyes and your ears and your nose and your mouth, and then you die. It's super awful. And you can imagine how fun that would be to draw during the middle of this crazy pandemic. Now, if all of these complicated, crazy stories sound good to you, well, check out Hazardous Tales number 10, Blades of Freedom. It's a gruesome one, but it's interesting, fascinating stuff, and it covers a lot of things that you will not hear about in school. I think it might be the scariest and possibly also the most gruesome of all of the books in the series so far. I recommend you try it out. Now, I have done my high-speed drawing monologue for about 25 minutes, so I want to turn the time over to you guys. Your questions need answering, and here's the thing, I don't just answer your questions, I draw the questions out, or I draw the answers out. So if you've got a question, go ahead and share it. Let's hear what we've got. Let's see, are we doing a moderator, or am I just going to read these off the board?
Hello, everyone. So I just want to remind you that we have some giveaway books. It says brand new book, Blades of Freedom. So if you want an autographed book, you have a chance to win. So stay tuned to the end to find out how to do that. Okay, and let me read some of these questions. Okay. Someone asked, is your real name really Nathan Hale?
I was expecting a question like this, so I've been keeping my driver's license nearby. Let's see. So, yeah, we'll point right there. You can see my name is Nathan James Hale. And I'm not named after the spy Nathan Hale. I am named after my grandpa, who was named Nathan Hale. And maybe he was named after the spy, but I can't ask him because he died a long time ago, so I don't know. But that is my real name. Excellent question. Oh, I said I was going to draw it. Hard to draw a name. I gave you a visual aid. I'll switch back to my screen here. Here we go, putting up the share screen. Got to keep my promises. If I say I'm going to share the screen, yeah, so here's my driver's license, and here's me, and that's my real name. Excellent question. There we go.
Our next question is, what advice do you have for aspiring writers?
What advice do I have for aspiring writers? And I will format this particularly to aspiring cartoonist writers too. I think there are two main parts of becoming a good creator. You have to split yourself into two different people, and both of these people have a job to do. Of course, as you can imagine, you've got to write. That's the number one thing. Try to write every day. If you've got a sketchbook, draw every day. You've got to make a product every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes. You've got to make something. But I said you got to split yourself into two people. The other part of yourself has to read. You have to read. You can't become a writer and not read books. You can't draw comics if you don't read a lot of comics and know what they look like. You've got to put as much creativity into your brain as you are also putting out. Right now, I talk to a lot of authors. Graphic novels are very popular right now. So we have these authors that are like, oh, graphic novels. They look at graphic novels, they get money signs in their eyes. And they're like, how can I do a graphic novel? And I'm like, well, have you read a graphic novel? And they're like, no. So that's the main thing. You gotta read. If you're not reading every day, don't bother being an author. You've got to take in all of that stuff. You got to see what everybody else is doing. You got to learn from it. You want to know one of the most helpful books I ever read when I was a kid? It was a book that was terrible. I won't tell you what that book is because I don't like bad-mouthing other people. But I remember when I was about 15 years old, I was reading a series and I got to, I believe it was the 4th book in this series. And I was like, you know what? This stinks. This book is terrible. It's predictable, it's boring, and I don't like any of the characters in it. And that's when it started to kind of tickle in my brain. I was like, you know what? If this book is this bad and got published, well, maybe I can get a book published too. Read the good, read the bad, read outside your genre, read in different formats, get audiobooks, get graphic novels, get manga, jump all over the place. You got to read and consume a lot. And then make sure you're doing it every day. Excellent question.
Awesome. So our next question is, what were your favorite things to learn about when you were in school?
Favorite things to learn about in school. Now, here's the sad thing. I did not love history class when I was in school. I wish, I should just make up a story about this amazing history teacher that I loved so much, and she had a hat like the Statue of Liberty. I'm just making that up. I had very boring history classes. I think a lot of that has to do with where I grew up. I grew up in Utah. Now, Utah is a beautiful state. We've got I will put us on the map for one of the best looking natural states. We've got 5 national parks in our borders. It is beautiful. We've got skiing, we've got mountains, we've got the Great Salt Lake. But when it comes to history, all we've got is covered wagons. So we had to do state history at school. Covered wagons and ladies with bonnets that look like this. Now, if you are in 5th grade, covered wagons are fun for a day, but can you imagine a whole semester of covered wagons playing that Oregon Trail game over and over and over again? Super boring. I did not love Utah State history. I've come around on that. If you've read my Donner Party book, you know that wagons are actually pretty gruesome and exciting. But I did not love that in school. My 2 favorite classes in school were, well, shocker, art class. But here's one you might not expect. I love theater class because I always got cool jobs painting scenery, building props, doing crazy projects and things. And then this wasn't just like a painting. This was something that a lot of people could interact with. They were all singing and dancing in front of my big backdrop. Super exciting thing. This was not something I expected I would enjoy. And I brought the art into it to do the painting and the drawing and stuff. But those were my favorite things that I studied in school. Good question.
Awesome. So I think this one is next. Someone requested you to write about the Cold War, and I guess, would you do anything on the Cold War in the future?
Okay. Well, I have to be very careful. The Cold War is a big subject matter. If you were to do just a book on the Cold War, it might be kind of boring because you'd just be kind of drawing highlights everywhere from 1945 all the way out to 1991 is all the different parts of the Cold War. And you just be like, oh, here you go, Cuban Missile Crisis. Here you go, Korean War. Here, all these little bits and pieces. So I don't think I'll ever do a one book on the Cold War. But what about these things that happen inside the Cold War, these little events? Because the crazy thing about the Cold War, if you don't know how that worked, during the Cold War, and I grew up during the Cold War, when I was a kid, we had nuclear bomb tests in school where we had to get under our desk, like a desk is going to protect us from a nuclear bomb. So Cold War was the United States versus the USSR. But here's the problem. We couldn't just fight each other because we both had nukes. And so if one country nuked the other one, well, the whole world was going to get nuked by these two jerk countries, the USA and the USSR. So instead, what happened was a lot of these little kind of proxy wars, these little kind of shadow wars, where it really was about the US fighting communism, but not directly. So we had these little conflicts like Korea, where the United States put army people in there, and the Russians backed Soviet equipment into their side and had little wars here, Vietnam, all these different little conflicts and things like that. It's a weird time period because people are fighting and dying, but it could have been a lot worse. I grew up reading all of the comics in my paper, and I mean all of the comics. So I would read Garfield and Peanuts and The Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes and all of those, but I always liked to flip over one page to the political cartoons. And when I was a little kid reading political cartoons, they were scary. Most political cartoons when I was a little kid featured the Grim Reaper. And the Grim Reaper always had his finger on that big red nuclear option button, and you'd see the big mushroom cloud going off in the background. If you didn't live through the Cold War, you didn't realize how spooked we were all the time. But the craziest thing is, aside from these kind of far-flung, spread out different wars and stuff, it was really a lot more just kind of sweaty guys at desks thinking about stuff. And I guess we had spies too, double agents. It's actually a very fascinating time, but I don't know if I'd ever cover everything in the Cold War in one book. That would be a tricky book to do. But one of the things that I mentioned when I was giving examples is book number 11. I'm not going to tell you which thing it was, though. I will tell you that I'm working on it right now. I'm writing it just back there with all of my research books. I'm reading tons and tons of research on this one. This book also features a new narrator, not a mosquito, but a lady reporter who saw it all happen. And the color for this book will be blue. But that's all I can tell you about the Cold War and book number 11.
We're so excited for that. Our next question is, what is your favorite book?
My favorite book. Okay, well, this is tricky. My favorite book of mine, or my favorite book ever, or I'll break it all down. So the book that caused me to want to become a writer was the book that I would check out from the library. I never owned my own copy, but we lived close to the library and we didn't have a TV growing up. So I went to that library all the time. And when I was a little kid, before I could read or anything, I was completely fascinated with this long, skinny book like this. Has a long, cool illustration with some trees in the middle. Maybe you've seen it before. It is called Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak, and had a big gold sticker on the front. This is the book I wanted more than anything, to climb into that illustration and live on that island with Max and all of the wild things. Now, I knew that wasn't a real place, but I knew the closest I could get to the experience of climbing into that island would be maybe if I could start drawing things like that myself. So this is the book that kickstarted my real love of reading and creating books. My favorite book of my own is always the next book, the next one in the line. After a book is done, I kind of move on. I mean, I'm still interested in it. It's still exciting to me, but I'm all about that new book. Oh, what's that famous meme with the couple walking down the street and the guy's like, oh, and the girl's angry. And if this meme is my books, well, the angry girl in the couple is all of my previous books, and the one I'm looking back at is the new book, the next one. There we go. That's a beautiful drawing of that meme. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Maybe you don't. It's some dumb internet stuff. But that's my favorite. I'm always excited about the next one. As soon as that one's done, it's going to be all about book number 12, and then on to the next one, and on to the next one. But I'm also a weird reader. I don't like reading the same type of book twice. I'm a heavy-duty reader. I listen to audiobooks nonstop. I read comics nonstop. I can't get enough reading. I'm always in the middle of like 4 or 5 different books at the same time. I have a book I'm reading on an e-reader. I have a book that I'm listening to on audiobook. I've got a comic and I've got a manga pretty much at all times that I'm working my way through. And I can't read the same kind of book twice. So if I read like a mystery, the next book's got to be like a scary story or science fiction or fantasy or nonfiction. Or I've got to keep moving and changing it. Great question.
Okay, we have two questions that I'm going to roll into one. How do you get all of your ideas and come up with your stories?
How do I get all of my ideas and come up with stories? I have a very specific, for a nonfiction book, I get all of my ideas from research. I mean, that's really it. If you're going to write nonfiction, I hope you like reading, because all the ideas for these Hazardous Tales books come from reading the true stories. Now, sometimes it's like, well, wait, where did you get the idea of a talking mosquito? Well, that's just because as I'm reading, I'm like, what's the best way to explain yellow fever? Ooh, I know, maybe the mosquito does it. A lot of these ideas come as I'm reading and researching and writing. I don't just do nonfiction history comics, though. I was just talking to one of your librarians earlier, and she is a big fan of my book, Apocalypse Taco. This is not a history book. This is a sci-fi horror adventure about a taco monster. You'll have to check that one out from your library. I also did one called One Trick Pony, another very weird, crazy book with a lot of crazy science fiction, aliens and robots and stuff in it. And when I'm working on books like this, it's hard because I can't just look at the research and get the stories there and figure them out. I've got to build these stories in my head. And I've noticed one thing. I have to be doing something. If I sit down and just try to write it out on a blank piece of paper or stare at a screen, or I can't do it. I have to be doing something. So I have found the two best places to get ideas for stories. My number one favorite one, I go running. Right now I have to run on a treadmill because it's icy and snowy outside. I go for a long run. If you run long distances, the more you run, the farther you can go, the faster you get, and the healthier you get. And if you're like me, your brain gets so bored that you start thinking up all these wacky ideas. And here's the thing. You could do this for a year, and even if you don't come up with any ideas, well, hey, you'll get in good shape. And the other place I get these ideas, two actually. One is in the shower, because you're in the shower, you're washing your hair, you can't really do anything, so your brain starts to think. And then the other one is another washing, and it's washing the dishes, right? If you cannot come up with a crazy idea, go do the dishes. Get a real big, dirty sink full of dishes and just go for it. Just start washing them and let your brain roam free and see if it doesn't find some crazy stories. That's what I find. I have to be doing something. And for me, it's running, showering, or doing the dishes. And all three of these are good because if maybe you strike out on ideas, well, hey, at least you did the dishes or got clean or got some exercise. Good question.
Okay, so we're running close to the end of our author talk. We want to thank you so much for coming. For the attendees, don't leave yet because we have some information on how you can win a giveaway or have a chance to win a free copy of Nathan Hale's new book. We want to say a huge warm thank you to Nathan Hale and also Mary Marola for helping set this up. And for donating those generous autographed book plates for us to put in the books. And if you're interested in attending more of our live events or our virtual events, you can check our website or our YouTube page as well. So thank you for everyone, and we'll give the information for the giveaway right now.
Everybody, this was super excited. The only thing that makes me sad is that I wasn't get to be there in person. So hopefully one of these years I'll be out there to Hawaii and do some fun in-person events.
We would love that. Thank you so much.
You gonna wrap up, or should we do a high-speed quick run through these last questions? I think I can do a lightning round. Sound good?
Does that sound good to everyone?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Right, I've got the Q&A open and I will just blast through them. Would you do a world history series one day? Maybe. What was my favorite book to work on? I'm gonna say the Grand Canyon one because it was really beautiful to draw those pictures. What made me want to be a cartoonist about history? Two things. I love history and I love cartooning. How do I find topical history topics? I do a lot of reading. I spend a lot of time at the library. Could I do the Gold Rush? Ooh, that could be a good one. It's going on the list. You have a bandage on your hand. Did you get hurt? No, this is just so I can draw on my warm computer screen. This is just a homemade glove that I made so that my screen doesn't get all greasy from my hand. Why did you choose to be an author other than any other job? I just liked drawing and writing. It was my favorite thing. I love to read, so I thought I'm going to try writing my own stories and reading my own stories. What made you want to research? Oh, the research babies. If you don't know, my books have a bunch of babies in the background that help me research the stories because I went to art school. I did not go to history school. I need help. So I've employed a bunch of babies to do my research for me. If you don't know what I'm talking about, read to the end of one of these books. Can I write about a book about the Korean War, like the airplane part? I really love airplanes. I will only say maybe. Maybe. Is it difficult to learn to draw digitally? Do you have any advice or tips? I do. When you are young, when you're growing up, when you are learning art, traditional materials all the way. Get paper, get pencils, get watercolors and pastels. Draw on the real media. All the skills you develop on real media will come with you into the digital space. If you just try to learn to draw in the digital space and then try to draw out in the real world, it won't work. But if you draw in the real world, it will all travel with you. Don't spend too much money. Stick in your sketchbooks and paper and art supplies as long as you can. Worry about digital stuff down the road. It's way better to do the real thing. If I could go back in time, what would I tell myself? Start drawing comics way earlier. That's what I would have done. What's the weirdest thing I've ever drawn? For my graphic novels, that would be what happens in the bottom of the taco restaurant in Taco Apocalypse Taco. Check that one out. Whew. Lightning round. Hope we got all of your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone to coming, and thank you, Nathan Hale, for doing this for us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Keep reading.
Have a great day, everyone.